Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
On this week's program, we talk with the DNR Commissioner about the status of our state's fish and wildlife. We'll also look at the emotional issues lawmakers are tackling that address the controversial practice of surrogacy. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. The catch and release season for walleye on Mille Lacs Lake ended in early September this year. And joining me in the studio to update us on the state's efforts to bring back the walleye in the lake and to talk about the health of all of the state's game and fish is Tom Landwehr, the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Catch and release of walleye was allowed on Lake Mille Lacs until September 6th. How have the restrictions worked, and what do you envision for the future?
Well, of course, most people know that Mille Lacs right now is a little bit of trouble. The walleye population has declined, and we're at probably the lowest walleye population we've been in a long time. And so this year, the state, in consultation with the tribes, developed a very conservative season. We estimated the total allowable harvest to be 40,000 pounds. The state's take of that is 28,000 pounds. Mm-hmm. When we run through models that predicts what kind of season we can have in order to stay under that, we concluded that a one fish limit during the ice fishing season and a catch and release during the open water season was the only tool that we could use, the only regulation we could use that would keep us under that 28,000 pounds. We've never done a catch and release on Mille Lacs. We didn't know what to expect. When we implemented it, we felt pretty confident at the beginning that that would get us through the whole season, but we quickly realized that the catch rates were very high. In other words, people were catching a lot of fish. The fish were hungry. The water temperatures warmed up very quickly this summer, which increases what we call hooking mortality, the number of fish that are released that subsequently die. Mm-hmm. And we have to count those fish. We model the number of fish, and we have to count those fish in our quota. And we realized, by middle of July that we were rapidly approaching that quota. So as you know, in consultation with the governor, we concluded that the fact that we had to close a year ago on Mille Lacs was devastating to the local economy. The governor and I talked about implications of continuing with catch and release past the quota, and determined that that was the only palatable solution for the economy of that area, was to allow catch and release. With the knowledge that the catch and release continuing past the quota would not have a significant impact on the population of walleyes in the lake, and that we would not be approaching a real conservation issue. So we continued until September 6th. We terminated on September 6th. Realized at that point that most of the fishing was over, but that we did not want to push that harvest any higher.
Any speculation as to what may happen in the future with that?
So there's a long process that we go through with the 1837 bands. There are 6 Wisconsin bands, 2 Minnesota bands. We have a biological group that works, we call it the Fisheries Technical Committee, that looks at the netting that they do, the experimental netting in the fall to determine what the population is. They will be meeting just next week to talk about what is the status of the fish population, what is a safe allowable harvest, and then we'll be going back in January and talking about what the open water season looks like. So it's a process that we engage in with the tribes to determine what's safe, and then we work with our advisory committee to talk about what's the preferred regulation package given the poundage of fish that we can take.
Well, and speaking of the advisory committee, the academic representative, Dr. Paul Venturelli, resigned in May. And then just recently, also the tribal representative, Jamie Edwards, resigned. In his resignation letter to you, he said that committee members, quote, dismiss scientific findings and do not respect the sovereign status of American Indian tribes. So what's next for this group, and how would you like to see things move forward? Well,
it's important to remember the purpose for the group. We constituted the group, probably a year and a half ago, because again, if we know that, for instance, we can take 28,000 pounds, the DNR can just go into a back room and figure out what regulation fits that, but that may not be what the stakeholders want. So we pulled this group together to really counsel us, advise us on what they would prefer terms of fishing options. And so it's a very important group to have input on, and so we have to have that group to be giving us that input. Very disappointed, very disheartened that both Paul and Jamie resigned. I think it takes a lot of time. That was one of Paul's reasons for quitting, is he's got a young family. But I don't expect the group to sort of just carte blanche accept the things that we give them. I expect them to challenge us, because that improves the rigor of our decision making. And so, yes, they challenge the science. In that, we have improved our science. We have improved the techniques we use to model populations and so on. And so I consider that a healthy characteristic, is that the group does challenge that. It's unfortunate that the two resigned, but we will continue the input group.
And will you add another tribal representative in the near future?
Still to discuss. I want to talk with the Mille Lacs Band leadership and find out what their desire is. Since this group is really primarily to discuss the state's alternatives rather than the tribal alternatives, it's most important to have the non-tribal members there. But I wanted to be able to offer the tribes a seat if they in fact wanted that.
Well, let's turn to moose hunting. It's been banned in the state since 2012, but the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa is reinstating the hunting season. They believe that the moose population has stabilized. So from the DNR's perspective, has the moose population stabilized, and will moose hunting return?
Well, it's important to remember how we got to where we were. Prior to 2012, the moose population had been in very, very serious decline for the previous 3 years. I think it dropped something like 50% over 3 years. And we can't point to any one reason why the population is declining. There's a number of sort of complementary factors. So there's a very serious winter tick problem. There's winters are warmer, which is not good for moose.
Right.
They have liver flukes, they have brainworm. All these things kind of seem to be piling on and helping drive the moose population lower. Since we did not have one single tool that we could use to stop the decline, the only component of mortality that we had any influence over was the hunting season. So we terminated the Minnesota hunting season in 2012. The bands followed suit for different reasons. There are 3 bands in the 1854 treaty area: the Grand Portage, the Bois Forte, and the Fond du Lac. Grand Portage and Bois Forte are in an agreement with the state of Minnesota for which they receive a payment every year. That agreement says that they will not have a big game season when the state of Minnesota does not have a big game season. So they were compelled to not have a season. Fond du Lac is not a party to that agreement. They have full treaty right, the ability to exercise full treaty rights. As part of their treaty rights, they are allowed to take the allowable harvest of moose. So the population has stabilized in about the 4,000 animal range, which was, again, about half of what it had been.
Right.
We'd like to see a longer-term trend, if this is just a blip, or if this is actually the new reality. The Fond du Lac Band has concluded that at this time it's important for them to continue a hunt. So they did announce to us they were going to. We concur that the harvest they're proposing does not propose a conservation risk. We advise them. We still would like them to not, because we don't know what is happening here, but they decided to continue. So
as we conclude today, deer hunting season is just around the corner, November 5th. What are some important reminders for hunters?
The deer hunting season, we'll have almost 500,000 hunters out there. It is one of the biggest days in Minnesota outdoors. The things that we always want to remind people is, be aware of the regulations, first off, right? So know what you can and you can't do. Make sure you wear your blaze orange. We've really dramatically decreased the number of firearms accidents by virtue of blaze orange and firearm safety training. Be especially careful around deer stands. We actually have more people dying and getting hurt as a result of falling out of a deer stand. Wear your harness. Make sure that everything is secure before you climb up. And of course, always know where you're shooting and what's beyond the basic principles of firearm safety. So it should be a very good year. We're very optimistic the population's up, and we're hopeful that we'll have a good harvest and a safe season.
Well, it sounds great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Landwehr, for coming in today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and have a great fall.
Thanks, you too.
There's a patchwork of laws across the U.S. regarding surrogacy, which is an arrangement whereby a woman carries a pregnancy for intended parents.
No federal laws exist, leaving it up to each state. Some states prohibit the practice, some states regulate it to varying degrees, and some states, like Minnesota, have not yet created a legislative framework. Joining me in the studio to discuss Minnesota's Legislative Commission on Surrogacy are the Commission's co-chairs, Senator Alice Johnson and Representative Peggy Scott. Welcome to both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So, Representative Scott, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the ethical and legal concerns with surrogacy?
Right. Well, some of the ethical ones have to do with the rights of the child. Does the unborn child have any rights? What rights do the intended parents have? In some states, they treat it like adoption. So really, until the mother, the surrogate mother, decides, yes, for sure, I'm willing to give this child away, those intended parents don't always have rights to that child until after the mother gives them up. In some states, it's prearranged, and the intended parents are on the birth certificate itself, so that's already, the contracts already lay that out. I think you also have to look at, and the ethical concerns also are for the rights of the surrogate woman to make sure that she is not exploited. And I know that's something that Senator Johnson and I both were concerned with. A lot of countries outlaw surrogacy altogether, and they do it for those reasons. Some people make the comparison of organ donation. In organ donation, you're not paid for donated an organ. So those are some of the ethical questions, and legal as well, because even if you have a contract that you think is airtight, there are things that could happen to cause that contract to go sideways. And so that's some of the stuff that our commission's been tackling.
And then Senator Johnson, I wanted to ask you, surrogacy has created some unusual bedfellows. I've read that religious organizations are opposed based on its use of in vitro fertilization, or the fact that sometimes it's same-sex couples who are interested in having a child. Feminist groups fear the exploitation of women. So what are some common misconceptions?
Well, I don't think it's very common. There are many very common conceptions of this, of surrogacy, and that is what we're about, is we're really trying to learn as much as we can, our commission, so that we can put forward some sort of regulations or description of what we think should be part of surrogacy. You mentioned about the Catholic Church, and there's no doubt about it. But it's not just the Catholic Church, it's just many people who share their same views, maybe not quite as dramatically as the Catholic Church does. But when I first came up with this surrogacy idea and started listening to the advocates for surrogacy, what hit me was exactly what Representative Peggy Scott has talked about, in that the exploitation of women and the concern about children was what really prompted me to take an active part in this. And I'm very pleased and happy that I was able to get this commission put together, and that we're working together, all of us. So I don't know. It's something that I think the federal, actually, I wish the federal government would put out and some sort of a pattern for all of the states, because it's very difficult to deal with surrogacy when each state is doing something different. And there is so much opportunity for people to move in and out of states where it's easier.
And that brings up the issue of statelessness that some children may face. If they're conceived in one place but the parents live in another, and the legal complications that come from that. Will the commission try to address some of those possibilities?
I believe we will, and I want to include international, because that is another concern that we have to watch out for, to see what's going on with other countries, because the surrogacy thing could move in from another country and coming back to the United States and be maybe
countryless.
Yes.
Yes. Representative Scott, I understand that sometimes people misunderstand the difference between gestational surrogacy and traditional surrogacy. Could you explain what the difference is, and will legislation, or should legislation, differentiate between those two?
I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
I think it should distinguish.
Okay.
I myself think that we should only go down the road of gestational, and gestational is when the mother, the surrogate mother who's carrying the child, has no biological relationship to the child. And I think legally there are some reasons that might be the better route to go. In traditional surrogacy, the child would have some relationship, either most likely the mother donated the egg or whatever.
Right.
So I think if we do go down the traditional and allowing traditional surrogacy, I think that it should be treated like adoption. So that mother that's carrying the child has a certain number of days before she, officially signs off that yes, this is the move that she wants to make in turning the child over to the quote-unquote intended parents. So
Because in that case, she is related to the child.
right.
Right.
And we've listened to a lot of testimony about even when it's not a child that's related to that mother, how just the mother-child attachment anyway, regardless of the biological connection, and the voice of the mother, and just there's a lot of connections there that people have a lot of legitimate concerns about. So there are not a lot of easy answers in this conversation.
Sure. Senator Johnson, is it appropriate to allow a woman to use her body for financial gain? So this goes to the exploitation question that we were talking about a little bit before. Should payment above and beyond the expenses of carrying the child be allowed, and how can we protect women from being exploited?
Well, I think that is an issue that we're looking at and hoping to come up with some sort of consensus on these kinds of things. First I want to go back to the gestational surrogacy. The surrogate person there is no genetic relationship to the embryo, and so that makes it a little easier if there isn't a real genetic connection with the child. But it seems to me that we have to consider what is implicated that would go on with this procedure. It seems to me that there would be some monetary benefit to the surrogate if they're willing to do it. I look upon it as, if we decide that surrogacy is okay, I think there is maybe a limit as to what you could receive for that, because I had 4 daughters. I have 4 daughters, and I know what it's like to be pregnant. It was very easy for me, but there are many people who have very difficult time with it, and one never knows for sure what's going to happen. And it's certainly a commitment. So that's the way my view is. But again, we are listening. Our task force, our commission was put together so that we could study and look at these things, come to some consensus on certain things, provide them recommendations, hopefully, to the legislature, and then legislators would hopefully pick up some of the issues that we would suggest would be good ones to develop for us, for our state. I will not be in the legislature next year.
You're retiring.
And that is a little bit sad for me, because I think I would be moving some of that legislation that I expect to come out of our commission. But I'm sure other people will, because there is a lot of interest on this topic right now.
Right. Representative Scott, do you agree with what she said about the compensation piece?
I have more trouble with the compensation piece. And one of the reasons it's being outlawed in several countries, particularly poor countries where, like India and those sorts of things, is because they have exploited poor women. And I certainly don't want to create a scenario where, say a college student, we all know that these college students are,
They have a lot of debt.
They have a lot
Yes.
of debt, and that's continuing to compile, and so I don't want them to be motivated for the wrong reasons to do this. I don't want it to be just monetary. One of the things that we have talked about, and most every policy that we're aware of, is that one of the requirements to be a surrogate is that you've already had one child.
Sure.
And so you'll be looking at putting some of those things in place
right,
as well?
right.
Okay.
And so maybe that would prevent that. And then do we put a cap of sorts on how many times you can be a surrogate?
Sure.
But those are all questions that are difficult. I go back to the comparison of organ donation and how we don't compensate people for that. So it'll be an interesting few months here to see where we land on that. And just because we start with a particular legislation, as you know, doesn't mean that's where we're going to end up.
And
So.
well, I look forward to learning more about the recommendations, and I want to thank you both for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Shannon.
you.
Governor Dayton proposed a plan that would use the state's $313 million surplus to help alleviate the financial strain some Minnesotans are facing in the individual health insurance market.
Basically, our proposal would provide monthly rebates in calendar year 2017 to people who are buying individual insurance policies and do not qualify for federal tax credits. They would receive monthly rebates of 25% of their insurance costs. That state assistance would in most cases greatly reduce their 2017 price increases. Overall, our rebates would reduce the 2017 rate increases from an average 55% increase to a 16% increase. And note that the rebate would be for 25% of the policy's costs, not just the 2017 cost increases.
House leaders recently met with the governor to discuss the possibility of a special session to address the issue.
We're going to have our staffs and the other caucus staffs work over the next week, recognizing the reality of an election in a week from now. But we're going to draft legislation, we'll work on that, and be ready, I hope and believe, to go forward with a special session as necessary very shortly after the election.
I think everything that we can do to provide some stability and comfort to them during this is what we have to do. I think we have no choice but to help Minnesotans out through this and provide them with some sort of relief. We obviously need to go through the normal legislative process and figure out what that looks like, but we've made a commitment to the governor that we stand with him ready to help Minnesotans that are being hurt by this.
The general fund is the largest of all state funds. Minnesota tax collections are deposited into the fund, then distributed to various areas of need. Producer John Brune explains the purpose of the general fund and the important role it plays in Minnesota government.
The Minnesota state budget is managed through a variety of funds. This combination of state and federal dollars could be thought of as having separate checkbooks. Within each is an amount of money that together pays for the operation of state government. Of all funds, the State General Fund is by far the largest and most significant.
The Minnesota state budget is composed of roughly 36 or so separate funds. The largest of these funds is the State General Fund. And as the name implies, the General Fund is just that. It's general, and it is used to finance a wide array of state government functions, anything from education to healthcare, to the environment, to perhaps debt on the state's long-term obligations.
The general fund is considered a non-dedicated fund, meaning there are very few restrictions on how the legislature can spend that money. Most of the other funds that make up the remainder of the state budget are considered to be dedicated funds. Money in these funds must be used for specific purposes. For example, the state receives money from the federal government dedicated for Medicaid payments or highway construction, while other state dollars are dedicated for things like the Healthcare Access Fund or natural resources. Because the general fund is highly flexible, it can be used to move state dollars to and from many areas of need. It is also unique because it must be affirmatively enacted every 2 years. This is different from many dedicated funds in the budget. The legislature, with the concurrence of the governor, must enact general fund appropriations every 2 years to provide the resources for the operations of state government.
The general fund tends to receive the vast majority of attention during the public budget process debate at the state capitol. It is the fund that most members look to when they're looking to make a specific appropriation for a project because of its flexibility. It gives legislators that opportunity to appropriate money for a particular program. After the budget has been enacted, the economy can change, priorities of elected officials can change, and frankly, politics can intervene. Circumstances create the need, in many occasions, for the legislature to reevaluate the existing budget and make changes. Having a 2-year budget cycle provides the legislature and the governor that opportunity to give the budget some attention over time. And a large part of the attention that the legislature gives is centered on the general fund. And this is because of its size and its primarily flexibility as a resource that can be used for an infinite number of purposes.
Money coming into the state is deposited into the appropriate funds. Revenue directed to the general fund comes from numerous sources, but 2 areas in particular make up the bulk of the fund.
Over 3/4 of the general fund is collected from the income tax and the sales tax. There are other taxes that contribute to the general fund as well. These include the statewide property tax, corporate business taxes, taxes on cigarette sales, taxes on alcohol sales, and a variety of other revenue sources. These other revenue sources are a much smaller contributor to the general fund. What this practically means, though, is that the general fund's primary revenue sources, income tax and sales tax, are highly sensitive to the overall state of Minnesota's economy. So when the economy does well, these taxes perform well and the general fund tends to grow. Conversely, when the economy slumps, income and sales taxes tend to slide and the general fund tends to suffer. That is one of the beauties of having a 2-year budget process, that the legislature can come in every 2 years, and frankly, frequently in the off year as well, to adjust the budget.
Once money is deposited into the general fund, it is distributed to many areas of the state budget, but concentrated largely in 2 specific areas.
By and large, the vast majority of the appropriations out of the state general fund are distributed to elementary and secondary education and health and human services budget areas. The elementary and secondary education appropriations constitute about 40% of state general fund appropriations. These are appropriations to state school districts, charter schools, and a variety of education programs. Over 30% of the appropriations from the general fund are allocated to health and human services, and these are primarily healthcare payments on behalf of low-income, elderly, and disabled individuals. The remaining 30% of appropriations in the general fund are a collection of other state programs, anything from the environment to debt service on state long-term obligations, state agencies, economic development, and higher education.
The state general fund is the largest of all funds that make up the state operating budget. It is considered to be a non-dedicated fund, meaning it can be used for just about any state government purpose. On occasion, revenues from other funds may be transferred into the general fund, or money from the general fund may be transferred out to meet a specific need. Because of this flexibility, the general fund plays a central role in the state budget process. Find out more about Minnesota's budget process at the Minnesota Management and Budget website.
Join us again next week as we review election results and other matters affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.